thanks so much for joining me today, Jerry. So Jerry Downing, I'm just going to introduce you a little bit to our viewers. So Jerry Downing is a retired bus driver and political activist for over 40 years. Jerry was born in West Cork in 1950. He was influenced by Tom Barry's guerrilla days in Ireland, where the leader of the flying column, the Third West Cork IRA Brigade, related the very successful campaign. He and his men and women fought against black and tan terror sent to Ireland in the early 1920s. Jerry joined the Workers' Revolutionary Party in 1976 and voted to expel its leader, Galway. Jerry Healy in Galway, and the leader was Jerry Healy in 1985. So Jerry was the founder of Socialist Fight in 2009. And also, every issue has carried a list of Irish prisoners of war since then and has reported on the struggle in Ireland. With a few more contacts, Jerry has formed the Irish Republican Prisoners Support Group in 2010, and also conducted many public meetings and pickets in front of the Irish Embassy and the Ministry of Justice on behalf of these prisoners, with demands that they be given political status. And the August 2010 Magabary agreement on the ending of forcible strip searching and other issues be implemented to this day. This agreement has not been implemented. Right. So my first question, Jerry, is in relation to the Irish community within the British context. So the first ever terrorism legislation introduced in the UK was for the Irish community, although, mind you, treason existed before then. So what is the root cause of political violence of the Irish community? And if we can speak a little bit about foreign policy and perhaps bring about a nuanced discussion, although this doesn't really take place much, and there are some people within British society that don't even know what the 32 county movement is, which is quite appalling. And also the 32 county movement, if I may add, is obviously a non-paramilitary faction, and it's a legal political dissent group. So Jerry, if you can explain.
Okay. The Irish community was subjected to the Prevention of Terrorism Act in December of 1974, following the pub bombings in Guildford and in Birmingham. This was draconian legislation, which had sweeping powers of detention, sentencing, and exclusion from certain parts of the United Kingdom of named Irish people. But it should be stressed here that the legislation itself was bad, but the way that the Guildford 4 and the Birmingham 6 prisoners were actually framed by the British state was far more effective in intimidating the Irish community. Both the Guildford 4 and the Birmingham 6 were completely innocent of the crimes that they were charged with. They spent 16 years in jail for these crimes. The whole Irish politically active leaders of the Irish community were very well aware that they were innocent. And of course the British political establishment knew they were innocent as well, and so did the prosecutors, and I would say in their trial, and I would say also that several of the members of the jury must have known they were innocent as well. The evidence against both in both cases was absolutely minimal, and the Birmingham 6 appeared at their first court appearance, and their face was absolutely pulped to pieces. They had obviously been severely beaten, and yet the force
by the police.
The police said that it was the army that did it. The army said the police did it, and nobody was convicted in the end. of that. But the fact that their confessions were then accepted from what had obviously been after they had obviously been tortured just exposes the whole hypocrisy of the British judicial system. I would mention that having convicting innocent people has a far more terroristic effect on the whole community than convicting people who have actually committed or planted a bomb or of some such thing. And the fact that everybody knew they were innocent meant that the movement in support of the struggle in the north of Ireland practically collapsed over the next year or so. They say that there was several common or branches of Sinn Féin in Birmingham. After about a year, there was none left. Everybody was absolutely terrified. They were regularly, you would see written on walls, "Hang the IRA," that kind of graffiti. And I myself encountered blatant anti-Irish racism from a doctor, in fact, when I fell seriously ill in August of 1974. So what is the root cause of the violence in Ireland? That's part of that question. Well, the root cause of the violence in Ireland is a partition of Ireland. Ireland was partitioned by terror in the years between 1920 and 1923. The Black and Tan terror in the south of Ireland, and in the north of Ireland there was a particularly heinous incident happened in July of 1920. Edward Carson, the unionist leader, made a big speech on the 12th of July on the anniversary of King Billy's victory at the Battle of the Boyne, and he said Ulster will fight and Ulster will be right, and he made a great demagogic speech. Less than two weeks later, there was a huge pogrom against nationalist workers in the Belfast shipyards and against women workers in the linen factories. They were all driven out from their employment by the use of what they call Belfast confetti. Belfast confetti is big nuts and bolts, metal discs, and huge ship rivets from the shipyards. They killed 53 people in this pogrom, and that is the basis of the Northern Ireland state that established its character right from the beginning. Therefore, the right to discriminate against nationalist workers is built into the very essence of that state, and it is, of course, an illegitimate state that has no right to exist because it is built on that basis.
I'm happy with that. So can we move on to the next question?
Oh, I just to follow up a little bit on that.
Yeah, sure.
James Connolly was the revolutionary leader of the Irish Labour movement, who participated in the 1916 uprising and was executed for his part by the British on the 12th of May 1916. There are two quotes from him that exactly characterises what the coming partition of Ireland was going to mean. He said, "But it is no good blaming it, that is loyalist reaction. So also no good but infinite evil can come of throttling to it. Let the truth be told, however ugly. Here the orange working class are slaves in spirit because they have been reared up amongst a people whose conditions of servitude were more slavish than their own. In Catholic Ireland, the working class were rebels in spirit and democratic in feeling because for hundreds of years they found no class as lowly paid or as hardly treated as themselves." And the second quote is his most famous quote, I would think. This is often repeated. "Such a scheme for the partition of Ireland was that agreed by Redmond and Devlin, who were the leaders of the Irish party in Westminster. The betrayal of the national democracy of industrial Ulster would mean a carnival of reaction both north and south, would set back the wheels of progress, would destroy the oncoming unity of the Irish labour movement and paralyse all advanced movements while it endured. To it Labour should give the bitterest opposition. Against it Labour and Ulster should fight even to the death if necessary, as our fathers fought before us. And we will come on to this later, but the Good Friday Agreement then reverses Connolly's position and basically accepts the partition of the country and the Loyalist veto.
Exactly that. So, what is the similarity in relation to the anti-terrorism legislation passed prior to the War on Terror? So, targeting the Irish community at that time, and now post-War on Terror, predominantly targeting the Muslim community. And what are the similarities in the struggle? What observations from, I mean, you've lived through the struggle, and what similarities in the struggle are there between the Irish political prisoners and the Muslim political prisoners? But not only the prisoners, but also the communities, the racism that they face, the overt racism, the institutional racism, how the politicians treat, my community and how they treat your community. If you can draw some parallels.
Okay, I'll try to do that. First of all, on the terror legislation, the Prevention of Terrorism Act, though draconian, was always temporary, and it had to be renewed through Parliament after either a year or 3 years. It therefore had to be endorsed by the Parliament, and when the struggle in the north of Ireland basically came to an end, or came to an end to that phase, much of the legislation was allowed to go into abeyance. However, from the year 2000, just before the 9/11 and the War on Terror, a new form of legislation began to be passed. These are the anti-terrorism laws. There are 11 separate pieces of legislation called anti-terrorism laws since 2000, and particularly since 2001, and they have grown progressively more oppressive and progressively more inimical to human rights. So for instance, the Prevention of Terrorism Act, the Anti-Terrorism Crime and Security Act of 2001 enabled foreigners to be detained as terrorist suspects indefinitely. So if you were a terrorist suspect, you could be detained indefinitely. Prevention of Terrorism Act in 2005 established the control orders, which was a form of house arrest for terrorist suspects. Remember, if you're a terrorist suspect, you don't need to be convicted of any crime, or they will say that the security forces have certain information about you which we cannot reveal to the public, etc. So these laws could be factored on that. And then more worryingly, of course, is the Terrorism Act 2006, and that instituted a crime of glorifying terrorism. Of course, this is a very loose term. What do you mean by glorifying terrorism? And that led on then to the situation where you have people arrested and charged with vague offences, and these kind of offences can result in indefinite detention. I'll come on later to the case of Mohammed Hamid, but the general principle is now established in these 11 pieces of separate legislation. As I say, terrorism is a very wide definition, political. Basically, what they were seeking to do was establish an absolute equation between political sympathy for the aims that terrorism groups might have, and equate that with support for the method they use. Say, for instance, if you supported, as an Irish person, you supported the IRA and its aims of unifying Ireland and driving out the British from Ireland, you could then be charged with supporting terrorism. Or if you were a Kurdish national who supported the right of the Kurdish people to have a nation state of their own, and agreed with the PKK to that extent, that could then be drawn as an equation that you supported bombing public places, which the PKK have done in fact. So you're making illegitimate and terrorist offences political views which are basically anti-imperialist and run against the principles that the British ruling class and the American ruling class want to impose in the world.
And that could be kind of, if we were to speak about kind of the idea of like supporting a nation state, there's many Muslim prisoners, political prisoners here in the UK that actually went to fight, you know, in Kashmir as well. The idea of kind of fighting the Indian occupation and things like that as well. So, and also even Afghanistan, during the occupation of Afghanistan as well, and they are imprisoned today. So, so what are the similarities in the struggle between, now very specifically, between the Irish political prisoners and the Muslim political prisoners?
Okay, I'll draw one very close relationship in our own experience as the Irish Republican Prisoner Support Group. Back in 2013, we organised a public meeting in London, and we got a high-profile what they call dissident Republican speakers, although they don't like to be called dissidents, real Republican speaker from Northern Ireland, and we were approached by a woman called Yasmin Cass. Now, Yasmin Cass is the daughter of Muhammad Hamid, and she came and spoke quite powerfully at the meeting on behalf of Muhammad Hamid, and she pointed out exactly this, that Muhammad Hamid had committed no crime, he had not planted any bombs, he had not done any act of terror anywhere, but he was charged with radicalizing his followers, and it is David Farrell, the QC prosecuting, told the court the true intention behind Muhammad's camps and talks were clear. It was nothing short of a grooming mechanism for disaffected Muslim men, slowly and sometimes subtly preparing them and radicalizing them for jihad. So that was the line of argument that the prosecution used, and Muhammad Hamid was sentenced to 7 years trial, but also he is detained indefinitely, because he is detained at Her Majesty's pleasure until he can prove that he is no longer a threat to this establishment. So this new form of imprisonment is then instituted in which people can be held indefinite until the Secretary of State or the government decides that they are no longer a threat. That is a life sentence. Therefore, because as soon as somebody proposes to release Muhammad Hamid, for instance, you will get the Sun and the Daily Mail and the Express mounting a huge campaign. How dare you release the terrorist who in fact has committed no crime at all. At the same time as Muhammad Hamid or Yasmin Cass was campaigning for her father, there was a man called Stephen Marney. Now, Stephen Marney had been picked up by the police in the north of Ireland in November of 2012. He's a member of IRG, which is a left-wing Republican socialist split from Sinn Féin, who campaigns very strongly for the Republican prisoners in the north and the south. And he was charged basically with the same charge, supporting terrorism. And they raided his house, and they took basically as evidence flyers, handout leaflets, etc., that were supporting the prisoners, and they said, look, these are evidence. But of course they were evidence of political